After looking at the pickups present in the shop, he found that they were mostly luxury pickups and not those that matched the work of carrying a grocery supplies. So, he decided to do the payment for what he was going to buy first. He was buying 24 Bentley Bentegas. The total price was $15,609,576. Plus, he was buying a sports car, a Continental GT whose price was $7,399,999. For the shipping fee, a number plate, insurance, and so on, Jack paid $27,000. This was to make sure that it was going to be fast. Then, there came the issue of customization. He wanted 5 of the Bentley Bentegas to have the logo for his new enterprise. Of course, since the 5 vehicles would be in the grocery department, they would have a G.D added below the name Jackson Enterprise. As for the others, Jack decided that they should have the logo for his brand. Of course, the logo wasn't out yet, and he was going to look for a designer for it. Then, it would be sent to the clothing shop and the Bentley shop. As for his sports car, there was nothing that needed to be added. He felt that it was okay the way that it was. For the customization, it cost him a total of $149,500. This was for all the 24 cars. Of course, since he was going to use the one that was present in the shop currently, the customization would be done after the others were delivered. It took more than an hour for all the procedures to be carried out. Immediately after that, Jack got out of the shop with the manager Evans Morris and the gleeful Philip under the envious and odd gazes of the other salespersons and those that were visiting the shop. Jack had just spent a total of $23,186,075. This brought his balance to $28,429,436. This was just enough to ensure that the store was fully supplied with stock. Now, his Jackson grocery department would only be left with the issue of getting the stock and expansion. Since there was no vehicle present in the shop that could be used for the grocery delivery, he changed his destination to the available truck shop. It was a Freightliner shop. He decided to leave his sports car and the bike at the Bentley shop as they left on the SUV. Since George was a delivery person before, he drove while Jack sat on the passenger seat. Charles and Agnes both sat on the back seats. After getting inside this car, he felt that there was no exaggeration when they talked about comfort in this Bentayga. He nodded in appreciation. George's driving skills were good as he had gone to the driving school and he used to participate in racing before he became a delivery man. Of course, it was only for a year and a half that he participated in racing. It didn't take them that long to reach the shop that had trucks. The trucks were displayed in the showroom for people to admire. He didn't want to wander around so much as it was already getting close to lunchtime. He had to complete things faster so that he could open the store on this very day. He found a Cascadia Freightliner. This truck was considered somehow big and at the same time not big. Well, it could be said to be the appropriate size for a city. It wasn't like those cargo trucks that moved very long distances. It had refrigeration system, just what was needed. With this, he wouldn't have to worry about grocery items going bad. He asked George if he could drive it, and he said that there were only a few cars that he couldn't drive, and a truck wasn't among them. So, with a total cost of $419,350, he left the shop claiming that the truck would be taken later on or it would be delivered to the address that he would give if there would be a need for it too. After they left the shop, Jack asked George for the place where they could get a supplier. George immediately drove the SUV to the outskirts of the city. Of course, the area that they headed towards wasn't like Yellow Street. Although this part of the city wasn't congested by office buildings, he could see that the area was clean. This was the industrial side of the city. It wasn't long before they arrived in front of a 7-story building that had a large base area. There were several trucks and pickups that were going to and fro here. After entering the gate, they were invited politely into the waiting area. After all, the Bentayga was a high-profile vehicle and as a result, they were treated with respect. Since George had been here before, he was familiar with the procedures. Before long, they met with the manager in charge of the sales department, Kevin. "Welcome, Mr. Jack." Since he was told not to use the Alfonso name, Jack decided not to use it at all. "I would like to have a cooperation with your company." Of course, the cooperation is for the supply of the grocery products. Jack went straight to the point. The amount of stock that you want is what will determine the cooperation." Kevin replied. "The amount of stock hasn't been fully determined, but what you can be sure of is that it cannot decrease, but it will keep on increasing," Jack said. He hadn't thought of this point when he came. But still, he was going to expand the business further, and there was no need for him to worry about the stock that he would be getting being excess. Now, that's a problem. You know, to sign a contract, we will need to get a figure on which we can both agree on. Kevin frowned after seeing that Jack hadn't even prepared anything. Well, this can be said to be the preparation. During this week, the stores that I am intending on starting will be opened. So that's the reason as to why the stock isn't determined yet. Jack then went on to explain that he was opening grocery stores all over the city. After hearing this, Kevin's tensed brows slightly relaxed. He then asked, "So what amount of stock would you like to start with?" "I want to start with $500,000. Probably if there's any in your warehouse, I can take it now. As for the others, I will inform you on when they're needed," Jack replied. After hearing that the initial amount of stock that Jack wanted was going to cost $500,000, and this was the initial stock, Kevin was relieved. It seems that he's not here to joke, he thought to himself. After they came to an agreement, the contract was drafted. The contract of supply was that the maximum stock that would be supplied would be worth $30 million in 3 months. This was the time that Jack was going to starting, and could be said that it would be a testing period. Of course, Jack wasn't worried about losses at all. After all, with the 100 times income multiplier system, the income would definitely be higher than the losses. But he wasn't ready to run a business at a loss. After they were done with the contract, Jack brought them to the store that he'd purchased the previous day. The three raised their brows. They were wondering to themselves, this guy is so rich, why would he need to open a store in such a backward place? But they didn't dare to ask the question out loud. So they followed Jack into the store. Although the store wasn't that big, it was decent in the street that they were in. Jack turned and looked at them. Then he said, "If you guys work well, then I might make you the leaders of the branches of the surrounding streets. This is the benefit of being my first employees. As for the salary, don't worry about it. The better you perform, the better your salary. So, don't worry about the figures that are written on the contracts." Jack ignored their astonished gazes and added fuel to the already burning flame. "Thank you, boss." The three thanked him in unison. They clearly knew that their qualifications weren't that high. So, for them to be in charge of an entire street was something big, not to mention a few other streets. Jack nodded and said to George, "The truck will be delivered here in about 30 minutes. You'll go to Pristine Agriculture Products, PP, to get the stock that I just paid for." "Yes, boss," George replied. His excitement couldn't be hidden at all. After all, he had just driven an SUV, and he was going to drive a popular truck, Cascadia. He liked racing and thus was a car enthusiast. Jack then looked at Agnes and Charles and said, "I guess you two know what to do?" "Yes, boss." The two nodded in reply. Jack then left them the $7,000 that he'd earned the previous day for them to get lunch as well as for change. He then left telling them that he would be back before the closing time of the store. He wasn't worried about the issue about the prices as the logbook was there. He had told the truck shop manager that George was the one that would receive the Cascadia Freightliner. Now, he was going to take his meal before going to the real estate agencies to get himself a good house. He left with the Bentayga. After all, his bike and the sports car were left at the Bentley shop. Jack ate in an ordinary street stall. Of course, the car attracted attention of the crowd, but Jack wasn't in the mood to discuss with them. Immediately after he was done with the meal, he immediately headed back towards the center of the city. The mansion that he wanted to buy wasn't found in the streets like Yellow Street. He had to find an estate that could accommodate his cars without causing discussions among those that would be seeing it. But there was a decision that he made. The house that he'd just rented, the apartment, he wouldn't leave it. He would be staying there in case he came to Yellow Street to supervise the stores. It didn't take more than 30 minutes before he arrived in front of a real estate agency. It was called Homescope Properties Limited. This was amongst the popular real estate agencies present in the city. After packing his car, he immediately headed towards the 5-story building. After entering, the service could be said to be good enough as he was welcomed by the enthusiastic salespersons. "Hello, handsome. What would you like today? Buying a house? Renting? We offer all of these services at an affordable price," one of the sales ladies immediately introduced. The others that had rushed over immediately shook their heads as they left while feeling dejected. Currently, Jack was having $27,510,086 in his account. So he wasn't worried about buying a house. So he went straight to the point. "I want to buy a good mansion that has a good parking space. One that can accommodate at least 6 vehicles." Hearing what Jack just said, the lady's eyes widened as admiration immediately filled them. This was obviously a rich person. He wanted a mansion that had a parking space of at least 6 vehicles. This implied that he had at least 6 cars. So she straightened her posture and made sure that her clothes were okay. By okay, I mean that she made sure that the top was revealing a little skin. Obviously trying to honey trap Jack. But who was Jack? He had been a member of Alfonso family for 19 years of his life. It was obvious that he had experienced such situations before. After all, although he wasn't favored in the family, if the girl could get together with him, they could use him as a bridge to meet with his other brothers. He was experienced, and this wasn't moved at all. He ignored this and asked, "Do you have a mansion that matches my taste?" "Yes, we do have it. It is in the most popular and suitable place for people with a high status. There are actually 2 mansions there, and they're named Prince and Princess Palace, or PPP. The location of these 2 mansions the north of the city, not too far from the center. The area is free from traffic, and thus there would be no problems like noise. The security there is top-notch. What's more, the environment is relaxing. There's an artificial lake that is at the center of the 2 mansions separating them. They are connected by a bridge that is made by the most popular designer in the country. There's a garden where there are several rare and almost extinct species of trees are planted. It can be said to be the most luxurious place for a person to stay. As for the parking, there's a huge parking space that can accommodate at least 10 cars. Jack was impressed by the mansion. It seems that this was what he wanted. But he knew one thing for sure. The price of the mansion wasn't going to be low at all. The saleslady had mentioned these 2 mansions on purpose. If they're sold, not only would she get a higher commission, but she would get promoted. She made sure to give the description of the mansions well so that Jack could get the image of it. Just to make sure that Jack was convinced, she brought him to the highest floor where there were several models of the mansions and villas that they were selling. Jack looked at the model and felt that the lady's words were no exaggeration at all. This place was indeed a palace. What's more, it was surrounded by a high 15 meters perimeter wall. This in itself was a show of the security. After looking at it for a while, he looked at the lady and asked, "So, how much for this mansion?" "The mansion is priced at $38 million. Of course, it was this price that has made it not to be sold for a while now. After all, Inchoate City is a small city, but the designer of the mansion had the intention of attracting the big shots here. The lady was quite honest with her words. Even she knew that the price was high and most people would back down immediately after hearing the price. So, what is the payment plan? Jack had expected that the price would be high. He could see that the level of the Prince and Princess Palace was higher than the one that Alfonso family owned. You can pay 50% deposit and the rest have to be paid within a year. As for things like renovation, you'll not have to worry about them. The mansions are ready and one can move in immediately. The lady replied. Her eyes were already shining with the dollar sign. She could see that money was just getting closer. After thinking for a moment, his balance was only $27,510,086. That meant that he was still short of a little over $10.5 million. To get this, he would need a little while longer. Furthermore, he wanted to expand the grocery department. Thus, he still needed money. So, he couldn't spend all of the money in his account yet. 50% was $19 million. So, Jack decided that he would pay $20 million deposit. Then, he would pay the rest during the month. After making the decision, he looked at the lady and said, I will pay $20 million deposit. The rest will be paid during the month. Do you think you can handle the procedures? The lady immediately got excited. Jack didn't try bargaining about the price and immediately paid a deposit of $20 million. The remaining would be less than half, only $18 million that Jack had just said that would be paid within a month. So, she smiled brightly and said, Of course, I can handle it. But it would still need the manager for the contract to be completed. Jack nodded and sat on a chair in the waiting area. In about 10 minutes, a lady rushed towards him with a few documents. She immediately introduced herself. Hello, esteemed guest. I am Sabrina Folk, the manager of Homescope Properties Limited in Inchoate City branch. Jack returned the greeting politely as he introduced himself. There was no need for him to put on airs. So, he was a simple person, just like how he was back at home. Mr. Jack, we can give you a 10% discount for the mansions. So, the price will be $34,200,000. So, after the $20 million down payment, you'll be left with $14.2 million. As for the duration of the payment of the balance, it's always supposed to be paid within a year. So, you can take your time. During this 1 year, you will have the certificates of ownership for the mansions. But if the 1 year period passes without the payment being completed, The certificate will be revoked, and you'll be refunded with 85% of your payment. I don't know if you can agree with these terms. Sabrina asked after she talked about the terms of the contract that had to be signed. Jack nodded. He was going to finish the payment within a month. He didn't like having debts hanging over his head. After the duo came to an agreement, Jack signed the contract and the procedures for handing over the ownership of the mansions was completed after half an hour. After Jack did the payment, he was left with $7,510,086. This was enough for the expansion of the grocery department. With more stores, he would be able to get more money and the income would be multiplied by 100. That way, his account wouldn't be left empty. Jack left the agency accompanied by the manager, Sabrina, to go and take a look at the mansions. It took them about 20 minutes to get there in Jack's Bentayga. Just as they had said, the area that the mansions were located was an area that was silent. He could see that there were several luxurious mansions that had been built in the area. This was obviously the rich's residential area. This residential area was known as Windhill Residential Area. This was where the leaders of the city and other bigwigs stayed when they visited the city. One thing that interested Jack the most was the fact that Prince and Princess Palace was located the heart of the residential area. This meant that this was the most expensive mansion in the entire city. Jack was sure that if he went to another city, then there would surely be other mansions that would be worth more than this. He knew that there were several people that could afford to buy this palace. But who would waste so much money to buy a mansion in a small city? This was the thing that had made the palace remaining hanging for over 2 years since completion. Jack looked at the high perimeter wall and the majestic gate in front of him. Then, after Sabrina showed her ID, the guards immediately opened the gate, allowing Jack to drive his Bentayga.